With pleasure, I want to welcome and introduce Nova Scotian author Amy Spurway to this year's Read by the Sea Summer Festival. Amy was born and raised on Cape Breton Island, a place with its storytelling culture that has clearly shaped her literary mind and her writing. After completing a degree in English literature at the University of New Brunswick, Amy left Atlantic Canada temporarily to study radio and television arts at Ryerson University in Toronto, where she completed her second degree. While Crow is her first novel, published with Goose Lane Editions in 2019, Amy has fostered her writing career as well through her freelance journalism, her work in the fields of communications, advertising, and marketing, her editing, and her performing. With remarkable clarity, Amy dates her earliest literary interests to her childhood when she began writing and performing for CBC at age 11. As we'll experience in a moment, with Amy's reading, she has a distinctive orality, if I could put it that way. She delights in the spoken effects of literature and conveys a fluid ease with dialogue, as the characters in Crow, through their lively, sometimes heated conversations, reveal. I think I can say that Amy likes words and books to be heard, to be voiced, read aloud, and performed. In Crow, we also witness Amy's visual talents, as she describes in extraordinary detail not only particular settings, Crow's mother's trailer, for example, and the wharf, but also the distinctive appearance of clothing, haircuts, jewelry, food, high school yearbooks, medical procedures, and even the striking interior, often colorful visions that Crow, the character, experiences during her illness and into her pregnancy. In other words, Amy as an author blends the oral and the visual as she brings her characters and their circumstances, whether funny or serious, triumphant or despairing, loving or vindictive, hopeful or tragic, to life. In her writing, Amy presents social life as it is and was uniquely and distinctively on Cape Breton Island, and as it is universally for any human being anywhere, in its sadness and joy. Today, Amy will read a passage from her novel, Crow. Thank you, Amy, for your generous presence at this year's Read by the Sea.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Suzanne, and I am so pleased to be here at Read by the Sea this year. I'm going to be reading from my debut novel, Crow, and I'm going to start right at the beginning and introduce you to Crow and the world that she's coming from. The first chapter is called The Dirt. I come from a long line of lunatics and criminals. Crazies on one side of the family tree, crooks on the other, although the odd crazy has a touch of crook, and vice versa. I am the weary, bitter fruit, or perhaps the last nut, of this rotten old hybrid with its twisted roots sunk deep in dysfunctional soil. Some even call it cursed, this family tree of mine. But if you ask me, that's all a pile of superstitious bullshit. Like I said, we're just a bunch of lunatics and criminals. Get your bony arse out of bed before I kick it out. Mama clomps into my room at the crack of dawn, thumping a laundry basket full of wet clothes down at the foot of my bed, and flinging the window wide open like some kind of sunrise-loving lunatic, threatening to kick my arse like a criminal alarm clock with big, flat feet. My mother, Effie Fortune, is the sanest, straightest one of the bunch. After all these years, I realize that threatening to kick my bony arse out of bed is her way of saying, I love you. Mama's the reason I came back to Cape Breton. Not that I had much choice. I want to tell her that I had that same nightmare again. The one with the flock of birds that laugh at me, and the tree that uproots itself to chase me across a swath of black and barren land. The monster branches grab me when I stumble and squeeze the life out of me, while the birds all fly around, cackling. The first time I had that bad dream was 1 week ago when I still lived in Toronto. I woke up gasping and retching, then I vomited all over my bed. Both of my arms dead as doorknobs, my head pounding and my eyes unable to focus. It took me almost an hour to pull myself together enough to clean up the mess. In the end, I biffed the creamy satin bedding in the dumpster out behind my condo because I couldn't stomach trying to wash it. Puke-covered designer sheets chucked in a dumpster. Of all the genuinely sad and jarring circumstances of late, that one foolish detail was somehow the final straw. I called Mama that night to say I was coming home. So here I am. When I try to speak now, all that comes out is a low groan, which Mama takes as the kind of willfully inarticulate protest she would have got from me when I last lived here as a lazy, melodramatic 18-year-old. You've been laying in that bed since you got here. Damn near a day and a half. It's no good for you. And that laundry won't hang itself. She shoves the basket closer to my bed with her size 9 clodhopper. Again, I open my mouth to say something, but Mama's already hustling out the door and down the hall before any words make it out. That's all right. I didn't come here to argue with my mother, even though a vestige of my saucy teenage self is alive and well and on familiar turf. I came here so that Mama could take care of me, so I could gather the strands of my life together and weave them into some kind of coherent story about who I was and where I came from, before it's too late, before I forget, before I'm just a memory here. See, I'm dying. But where are my manners? We haven't even been properly introduced. Just let me pull on my fancy pants, flatten my hair, and slide into my smooth, persuasive, multi-level marketing expert voice. Good day. I'm Stacey Fortune, former manager of marketing communications for the Canadian division of Viva Rica, the essence of inspiration. What's that, you ask? Viva Rica is a carefully crafted and ludicrously expensive blend of 18 essential superfood extracts that supports and stimulates the flow of health and wealth to a handful of folks at the top of a company pyramid by pushing highly sophisticated 21st century brainwashing sales and recruitment bullshit through a dedicated network of wishful thinking super juice junkies. We'd be proud to have you and 20 of your closest friends join our rapidly growing global distribution family. The greatest journey starts with one small sip. That's the kind of marketing prowess that could have earned me the prestigious Viva Rica Juicy Details Award, which recognizes excellence in convincing desperate people that pawning off crates of $50 a bottle blueberry juice on their friends and family is their ticket to entrepreneurial bliss. Unfortunately, I lacked the kind of bubbly ambition that would have helped me float all the way to the top of the Viva Rica pyramid. Probably because I didn't drink enough super juice. It gave me gut rot. How about an introduction that's a little more down to earth? One where my pants are clean but not fancy. My hair is only a tad ratty, and my voice has just the faintest hint of a charming yet ambiguous East Coast accent. Hi, how are you today? I'm Stacey Fortune. Up until 2 weeks ago, I was the picture of a strong, successful, independent urbanite woman. I had a mediocre career, an overpriced condo in downtown Toronto, and a hilarious story about how I empowered myself to blow gobs of money on stupid shit in the name of retail therapy after I gave my cheating fiancé the boot. Then I got diagnosed with 3 highly unpredictable and certainly inoperable brain tumors, which sporadically turned my limbs to jello, my eyes to kaleidoscopes, and my head into a world of hurt. Now I'm holed up in my mother's small and scruffy trailer on small and scruffy Cape Breton Island, holding out little hope that the doctors in this have-not hellhole can do much to stop me from morphing into a paralyzed bag of piss, drool, and babble before I unceremoniously croak. Hair, pants, and tone be damned. Let's just cut to the chase. Hi, I'm Stacy, but you can call me Crow. How about being nice to me? I'll be dead soon. A few pages in, and I just blew the ending of this story. That's all right. It's painfully predictable anyway. I really should have just written, girl gets tumors, girl loses mind, girl dies, the end, on a sheet of loose leaf, slapped it in a damn do-a-tang folder, and been done with it. But that is not the style of a masochistic, narcissistic drama queen such as myself. Get comfy and get the tissues, dear. This here is a proper Cape Breton tale of woe and shame. Grabs at the heartstrings and tugs. All the old dolls will click their tongues and say, yes, poor Crow Fortune, deathly ill with the tumor smack dab in the middle of her brains. What a sin. So young. What, 30-something was she? Makes you wonder, don't it? About them fortunes and the, you know. Because nobody will come right out and say it. It's always whispered every time something terrible happens to one of us. The, you know. The thing that makes us lunatics or criminals or both. The thing that cuts us down in the prime of our lives. The curse of the poor, unfortunate fortunes. They say it goes back generations. I say it's a convenient cover for people who are prone to poor life choices, bad luck, and bouts of lunacy. Either way, there's a story here about me, about my people, about this place, and I need to be the one to tell it, if only to myself. Get this life of mine down on paper while I still can. That's item number 1 on my bucket list. Or my fuck it list, because fuck it, I'm dying, so I'll say and do whatever I want now. But first, I better get those towels out on the clothesline before Mama has a conniption fit.
Thank you, Amy, for that very lively and animated reading from the opening pages of your novel, Crow. As we have just heard, you dare to portray the dark, harsh side of life on Cape Breton, not the natural beauty apart from the wharf, or the charm of Celtic music and culture which tourism would highlight, but social hardships, poverty, the scramble for employment, communities scarred by mining, drugs and drinking, infidelity, dishonesty, the absence of genuine friendship, and bad fortune in a family that seems cursed. What led you to this dark and difficult subject matter? Was it a lived experience? A story that you felt that you needed to tell with honesty and authenticity? And how have your Cape Breton readers responded?
I was really nervous when this book was released about how it would be perceived by the people closest to me, by people who kind of knew me, and just by Cape Bretoners in general. But I felt it was really, really important to tell an authentic story, and for as long as I could remember, the hard stories were part of the stories that were told to me, and they were part of the stories that I witnessed in my community and in our history and in the people around me. And the two things, that darkness and the light, coexisted in everything for me. And to me, that was part of the beauty. And I got really frustrated at only being presented with the beautiful parts, because the dark parts were what made that beauty even more remarkable, because it was stories coming from a people who had endured tremendous hardship and still retained something beautiful, and something beautiful in the midst of that hardship. So I was afraid when it came out that being so ruthlessly authentic could be risky. And the reception that I received from the people back home was beyond anything I ever could have dreamed. It was absolutely beautiful, because I think people from Cape Breton know that this is our truth. This is our reality. This is the authenticity. It is darkness and light together.
Thank you, Amy. You've given us a lovely insight into what you call darkness and light in a distinctive and unique culture that you have with courage portrayed. And I'm delighted to hear that your readers are responding so enthusiastically. Your facility with dialogue is also remarkable. You capture accents and dialect and colloquial expressions and distinctive vocabulary in a kind of earthy street talk, if I could use that term for rural Cape Breton. Your characters dismiss politeness. They say exactly what they feel in words that are blustery, witty, and often impulsive. As a writer, how have you created this colorful speech? Do you listen carefully to the way people talk, deliberately overhear their conversations?
A lot of the dialogue was pulled directly from my mother's mouth, basically, and from the people around me. And so this was just the way I always heard people talk.
Thank you, Amy. Those ways of speaking are obviously a very lived experience for you, which resonates as well for the reader with a wonderful authenticity. I'd like at this point to ask about the culmination of the novel, the final event, so to speak. Will Crow live or die? You introduce her at age 38, when she has just been diagnosed with 3 inoperable brain tumors and a very poor prognosis. Because Crow narrates her story in first person, readers have intimate access to her mind, that is, to her preoccupation with death. I'm dying, she says, when I'm gone. I won't be around much longer. Be nice, I'll be dead soon. I'm getting sicker. I'm going downhill fast. This is my last birthday. I've come home to die. Until the epilogue, though, the fate of Crow is not revealed. You carefully structure and sustain the reader's interest and suspense for that long. How did you decide, as a reader, what to do with Crow? Why did you choose the outcome that you did? I'll let you mention it if you want.
That's a tricky question, because in many ways I feel like I didn't decide the outcome. The character of Crow, and this ties into the dialogue and the voice of the story as well, was so vivid for me the entire way through, that she became kind of a living character in her own right, who had her own agenda with things. And so as a really present character from start to finish in this story, I don't think she would have, in fact I know she wouldn't have let me end it any other way. I know that sounds kind of hokey, but it was her story and it was demanding to be told her way.
No, that's very insightful, Amy. And it gives us a sense that the life that a character takes on in your mind with her own, in this case, intent and purpose. I suppose in asking this question, I was thinking also of the difficulty that you might have as a writer, creating this vigorous young woman who is very determined to live life to the fullest, still valuing and needing friendship, eager for adventure, determined to keep the mining company off of her land, daring to be unconventional, yet afraid to immerse herself too fully in life as she continually reminds herself and others that she has little time left. Was this a difficult duality for you to straddle, to construct a character who is still alive and still wanting to live, but aware at every moment of her impending death? What kind of a challenge was that for you?
That wasn't much of a challenge because it struck me as, again, kind of the only way things could be, and that ultimately I was operating from a really, really strong belief that the real meaning of our lives is kind of not just what we do for ourselves, but how we relate to the people around us, to the world around us, that she needed to step outside of herself and see the bigger picture, and that was where the peace would come from for her within this really, really difficult situation. Almost distracting her from her impending demise was this realization that she was a part of something bigger. She was part of a community. And so that really came through, and it seemed like a really natural progression that she moved from this really individualized place to a much more connected and collective place, and realizing that she had a part in it and that she could still impact the world around her, even though she was facing these dire circumstances, and that brought her some satisfaction.
Yes, the relationships that you develop in the novel are quite striking, so thank you for that remark. On a lighter note, I was also quite fascinated by your charming and colorful nicknames for most of your Cape Breton characters. Above all, Stacy Fortune acquires the name of Crow at age 5 when she steals a piece of costume jewelry from the bargain store. In Toronto, as an advertising agent, she uses a real name, but on Cape Breton she refers to plain old Crow again, as she says. When you developed her character and worked with that nickname, did the word Crow take on other associations for you in addition to that childhood theft? Were the raucous qualities of her character, for example, or the harsh, sometimes grating tone of her voice, or, as the monk tells her, the communal, protective nature of crows, or even the blackness, the darkness of the bird, were they part of your thinking as well when you chose that name?
Oh, absolutely. The name Crow as her nickname was absolutely no accident. It was a real symbol of all of those things you mentioned, of the grating quality of her voice, the no nonsense, a little bit of a trickster element and an intelligence, but being a bit of a pest, but also beloved by people, and as a symbol of the other worlds that crows are in folklore and mythology alleged to travel to. So she kind of has little touches of that in there too. So there's a lot of layers of symbolism that went into the selection of that as her nickname. But it also comes from a bit of a personal place, in that my mother always made fun of me and called me a crow because I liked shiny things.
Oh, that's lovely, Amy. Thank you for that insight into a very thoughtful name for your main character. I will pause with my own questions for a moment because I have a couple from audience members. The first pair of questions comes from Sarah in Trenton. I'll read them both. In Crow, she says, you talk a lot about broccoli. Do you still eat it today? And are there any other recipes passed on through your family that you think we should try? She also asks, Crow is your first novel. What should we expect next from you?
Brockelglop is absolutely something I still eat to this very day. Every single time I go home, my mother makes it for me. I make it myself, but no one else in my house will eat it, so that means I will eat the entire pan. And I've tweaked the recipe for my own tastes a little bit. It was such an important kind of food in my family that when I got married 20 years ago, we had a potluck dinner for our wedding reception. And my mother and I and a couple of friends spent an entire day making gigantic pans of broccolop for everybody at our wedding to eat. So it's very much a real thing, very much still beloved by me especially. That's probably about it for recipes that took on a real deep meaning. And there's an actual recipe for broccolop in the book club guide to Crow, which I think is still available on my website at amyspurway.com, although the website's not well up to date, but I think the book club guide is there with the recipe in it, as well as a recipe for squares, because everybody has a squares recipe. I'm well into a second novel, and it's a story that requires a lot of research because I'm going back in time a little bit. So I'm working within the historical context of the Cape Breton mine strikes in the 20s. And it's a story that is connected to Crow and her family history. So that's all I'll say about that, but it is underway.
Of course. Well, that's very enticing. So all the best with that upcoming work. I have a question from another audience member, Ronan O'Driscoll, and he asks, what is it about Cape Breton that has produced so many artists and writers for such a small population? I see parallels with Ireland, he says, but I'm interested to hear your take.
I think this goes back to the question about the light and the darkness, and I think there's something about hardship and struggle, like that real human struggle for survival in a lot of regards, that breeds creativity and resilience and the bravery required to be a storyteller. And part of the parallels with Ireland I see too, especially in industrial Cape Breton as opposed to rural Cape Breton, which was where I spent most of my time and where a lot of my ancestors were. And many of them came over from Newfoundland, and they arrived in Newfoundland from Ireland. So there were people who were already coming from rugged places and difficult circumstances, and storytelling and humor, and even the dark humor, is what kept people going. It's what gave them the strength to just power through and deal with whatever life threw at them. So I think that's a really important piece of where the creativity in Cape Breton comes from. It's our tenacity, and it's born of that light and that darkness.
Thank you, Amy. That remark really points to my final question. Well, I opened with a comment about the dark, difficult aspects of life on Cape Breton that you have portrayed so vividly. I'll close with a contrary thought. Is Crow also a novel about hope?
I think it's at its heart a novel of hope, and a novel about love, and showing how hope and love are things that can survive in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of sorrow, in the midst of darkness. It's the light in the darkness. So I think despite so many of the circumstances in the story, ultimately, it's a love letter to a people and to a place.
Thank you, Amy. That's a lovely note on which to end. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.